So I wanted to talk a little bit about hardware and just about experiences I've had with hardware. Just share it with you and hopefully solicit some good interest in questions. So where's the okay, here we go. So I want to emphasize the hard aspect of hardware, but not get too discouraging here. Just about me, my background is in technology. I've been working in tech for about 10 years. In terms of my engineering background, it's mostly design, mechanical engineering, systems engineering, and startups. So everything from, as I say, from raising money to cleaning the toilets and everything in between. And sometimes there's not much of a difference between the two, depending on how you feel about it. But both can be fun too. In terms of what I've worked on, I started out in medical software. Speaking of things that can be never mind. It was basically GI related and interesting. Had a hardware element, but mostly we did software. And then I jumped into hardware, starting with military robotics, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and then eventually to consumer products that I'm actually really most excited about right now. I focus a lot on innovations and invention, and so I've worked a lot with IP. Okay, so they don't call it hardware for nothing. So let's talk about why none of us should be making hardware startups. So let's get real. So first, hardware, it's really expensive to develop. It requires deep skill sets, tooling, a lot of stuff that just takes time, takes money, and requires a lot of outside help. It's expensive to distribute. You effectively have to take your cash and lock it up in units that sit on shelves, and so your cash becomes illiquid, and you have to sell out that inventory and deal with all that float. So that's really a pain in the butt. You really can't be vertically integrated at this point when you're starting out. So when it comes to a startup, you're starting with a few people, hopefully some money, and you don't have the ability to make everything yourself. So you have to rely on a lot of different suppliers. And anybody here who's made hardware will know that that's a big pain in the butt, and can be challenging and can actually ruin a business. Number 4, it actually has a marginal cost of production. So all my software friends complain about that all the time whenever I try to pitch them on hardware projects. They're like, oh, but it costs money to make a marginal product, and software, we don't have that problem. So that's a real pain too. Okay, the last one, it scares the crap out of most investors. Well, it has for the last, say, 20, 30 years, but recently it's gotten more popular, and I'll explain why I think so. So this is why we shouldn't be doing hardware. However, so why should we make it now? What's changed? At least it's just me drinking the Kool-Aid here, but I think that we're in a state of transformation, and I think it's actually a lot of what everything was talking about with the idea of software and internet being delivered via hardware, and I think that's what makes hardware more interesting today. So let's just respond to these other ones, these last points. So it's expensive, right? Well, it's getting cheaper. It's getting cheaper every year. I was really surprised as a person who's used CAD for a number of years. I was really surprised to find out that CAD's available online now as a service. That's a huge transformation, and it's a good quality CAD program. All of the tools you need to develop products, you can get access to with student licenses. If you have friends who are in school somewhere, you can develop the stuff. You can email the files off and have things printed. There are a lot of ways to develop things very quickly. Number 2, distribution. Well, thankfully the internet came along and freed a lot of us in this space. So we don't have to necessarily distribute directly into retail day one. We can start online, and with the rise of crowdfunding sites and pre-order campaigns, we can do a lot to get started before we actually build everything. So that's huge. Number 3. So the inputs, the necessary inputs for hardware are becoming rapidly commoditized. I would say for hardware that utilizes software and connectivity. And that's because of mobile technology going into the developing world. It's just driven costs down tremendously, and every year these costs are going down even more for the components like the wireless chips, the processors, and so on. So that's a huge trend. That means that we'll have margin expansion for quite a time to come. Okay, number 4, marginal costs can be decreased with scale. So not only with the components themselves going down because of other industries, but also if you get traction, you can actually drive your costs down tremendously and leverage global supply chain. And you can do it with a really small team. That's one really cool thing about hardware versus software, in some cases with software. And the last thing is about investors. So investors actually are pretty jazzed about the potential of IoT. And maybe this is a bubble. It probably is a combination of a trend and a bubble. But in either way, in either case, money's there, and people are excited and interested. And so now is a really good time to take advantage of that. And then you always have crowdfunding, which I actually think is in its infancy. And I think we're going to see over the next few years the rise of equity-based crowdfunding. All right. But let's get to the most important part of this. Ultimately, you can rationalize everything, and you can look at the models, and your brain should do that. And you're going to need that to raise money from third parties. But ultimately, you need to make hardware if it's a part of an overall solution or experience you're trying to create for someone else. So if you're focused on that, you shouldn't just pause and say, well, there's a roadblock because there's a hardware component here. You should actually try to solve that problem, because now's a good time to do it. And then I like to think of this simple test. Now, this is from a consumer perspective. Does it pass this test? Would you give it as a gift to your best friend, a partner, or your mother or father-in-law? Now, from a consumer perspective, if you're making hardware, it's going to have to pass that test. Now, maybe it's not an appropriate gift to give to those people, but it has to be something that you're ultimately proud of. Because if you're not proud of it, you shouldn't be doing it. You got better things to do. So I think that human beings, and I say we, human beings are ultimately wired to solve problems, and that's why we're here. That's why we have buildings. That's why we have telecommunications. That's why we have food. With everything that we've done has been centered around solving problems. So we identify something and we want to make it better, make it different in some way. What's helpful for me to look at, if I take that sort of broad range of problem-solving scope and narrow it down to just two very specific ways of looking at solving problems as a simplification to help with a startup, I think of two general approaches that are very, very powerful, especially when combined. And one is the engineering approach, obviously, which is inherently creative. It's problem-solving, science-based. The second is a sourcing approach, which is inherently social, which is communicating with other people, because there are a lot of bits of data that you won't uncover, and you can only find out information, and you can only sort of recruit that extra engineer when you go out and talk face-to-face with people and communicate. So I think that when you're blending these two approaches, the sort of the social approach, the sourcing approach with say people, and mostly it's human related, and then engineering approach, which is inherently sort of scientific, put those together and you actually can build pretty incredible teams. So just something I wanted to share with you. All right, well, my tendency is the engineering approach. And so it's interesting that if you throw a problem out there and you have a room of people and they try to solve it individually, you'll find that each person will try to solve it with the way that makes the most sense to them. It's the way that they solved the problem in the past. And so if you give a problem to an engineer, they're going to solve it with some kind of intricate solution. If you give it to a recruiter, they're going to hire someone. So it's you think of it that way. My approach is building stuff, because that's just what I've always done. The picture is relevant in that I grew up on a farm, and so most of my background as a small child was building stuff and maintaining machinery. So my dad and I operated a 900-acre farm in the Midwest, and I did that for many years. And I don't think it's because I was on the farm that I ended up being good at building stuff. It's that I happened to like building stuff, so I took advantage of it while I was on the farm. Even though my brother, who was a software guy, ended up ignoring the farm duties and writing code, which actually turned out to be good for him. Okay, what does that have to do with anything? Okay, so I'll just give you a quick background on myself here. When it comes to solving problems and what got me into hardware in the first place, it started with a phone call I got from my brother. And he's not that, but he can sometimes look like that. My brother had worked in software in Silicon Valley for a number of years. I was working in medical software. He founded a company called Palantir Technologies, which you guys probably a lot of people have heard of that, out in Palo Alto. And around 2004, they started deploying product with the government. And so there were people coming in to Palo Alto to train on the software, mostly CIA analysts and other people who were using it to track down terrorists during the wars. And so during that time, what we found is that people were using the data systems and the software to plan out operations. And then separate groups who were, say, special forces were going out and banging on doors, trying to find bad guys and track down weapons. And they were doing that face to face. And they were getting shot, and they were causing a lot of harm to other people in accident. And so we realized that robotics was something that could really help here. And being sort of like hardware-focused, hardware-minded guy that I am, and talking with my brother, when he called me up and said, "Can you help me with this robotics project?" I said, "Sure." So prior to us launching that, this is sort of how bombs were dealt with. And this is a little bit of an exaggeration, but it's not much off from reality, which is that people get suited up and go out and disarm bombs by hand. And also, you guys are well aware of tactics today involving people going and slamming down doors. So we said, how are we gonna change that with 4 people and very little money, but access to customers, because they took us seriously because they were using Palantir, they're training on it. So we incubated this out of Palantir. We literally built dozens of non-functional prototypes. So this was like 2006, 7, 8, and we designed this stuff with FreeCAD software that I got from my sisters at Berkeley. We 3D printed them, had artists paint them. They looked like real products, and we literally took them to military bases and said, "Hey, what do you think of this?" And we asked questions. We made fake brochures. We then would build some semi-functional models. Some of those actually were we got in Fortune magazine with some models that barely worked. But a lot of people took it very seriously, and we were able to learn a lot about the use cases to understand what to do, and we did that with very, very little money. And a lot of what allowed us to do that were these rapid prototyping techniques. The fact that you could print, you could send files off to quickparts.com, and they would mail you back machine parts, things like that. So we iterated for about 2 years to get to a spec, and then we actually raised money and built a solution from scratch. Now, the building of the solution from scratch, that part we underestimated dramatically. And it ended up taking an extra year to get the final product out. But what we did was we eventually shipped this product, which is now, it's the #1 selling product in the US market for first responders. So there are probably 1,000 plus of these things out right now, roaming the streets, looking for guys acting up and looking for bombs. This is how doors are entered now, after the fact. And okay, now what got us into smart home technology? Well, I think that what really interested me in robotics was sort of building stuff. I just had this desire to build stuff. And when someone presented a problem, like someone getting blown up or shooting sort of casualties in hand-to-hand combat, I thought that would be a really interesting problem to solve. And after working on that for a long time, I just had always been sort of personally drawn to consumer, and really wanted to build consumer robots. So after doing the robot project for about 6 years, I decided to go after these guys. So what were some of the observations? We used to call it the Robotics Revolution, and it was always 5 years away. And then all of a sudden, people started calling it the Internet of Things. And I was like, wow, that means that people are starting to think that this is real. And if they think it's real, then it might become real. Second, so early adopters are growing in numbers every year. So this is sort of the rational side of the mind. Like, let's rationalize this. Why should we do this? I just want to build stuff, but what's the rational side of it? Early adopters are growing in numbers, and they're ready for this stuff. The components are getting much cheaper, much cheaper. And we learned that at Robotex. And multiple generations of consumers have smartphones. So my parents, who are in their late 60s, and almost 70, they're now texting me, and that's a huge change. That's a transformation. And so we realized that connected home is something that's possible, and also we're noticing the retailers are starting to stock products, and they're starting to build special sections. And so a lot of the rational side of my brain was like, this makes a lot of sense. And then there was an emotional element, though, which is similar to the robot company, which is that I wanted to just build something, but I didn't know what to build. And then there's a personal story, there's a personal connection here. What happened was a friend of mine's house burned down. And at the time, we were using technology in our robot products at the Robotics company that would, like a car's check engine light, tell you when there was some problem. Like it could be that one of your sensors is bad or something. It would alert you and let you know. And we realized that your house doesn't have anything like that. And so that helped us at least focus the first product. So again, it was kind of, it's like betting on an industry and then realizing that we needed to build something, and it needed to be personal for us to have the motivation to go through all the pain and all the slogging in the first couple of years to actually make something and ship it. So we started this company called Leeo. It's 2 years old. I'll go through this fast because you guys can look it up on the internet. We're focused on smart home technology, so beautiful products that are easy to integrate in your life, that 70-year-old people can put in their homes and use, that they can enjoy looking at and can get a lot of deep benefits from. First product is a plug-and-play nightlight that listens for smoke alarms and calls your cell phone when they go off and allows you to call 911. We've had a couple of people already in the last 6 months. We've had 3 people's houses get saved from this, which is pretty cool. And a lot of people actually just enjoy the product and talk about the colors and sharing of that. So this is how it works. Oh, sorry. Phone here, phone call. So people, you plug it in, it listens for alarms, and it calls you and lets you know what's going on. It's pretty, so it's kind of like a mullet. It's sort of business in the front, party in the back. But this isn't the end. We have a lot of stuff in the pipeline, and I guess let's get back to the data points here. What's our approach? Ultimately, build things that we want and are proud of. So I'm proud to be here on the stage to tell you about what I've built, and if I wasn't proud of it, I shouldn't be here and I shouldn't be building it. So whatever you want to do with hardware or whatever startup you have, be proud of it and build something that you want if it's consumer. Focus on product categories that have androgynous appeal. Now that's a little interesting, which is don't exclude anybody. Like focus on a wide group of people because you don't know who's going to really adopt it. So day one, sort of start broad, and then start to recognize who's buying it and why, and move in that direction if that makes sense. Target and engage early adopters. So this is something that was a key insight for us within the category of smart home, which is that it's pretty early in the market. If you look at a lot of the product categories out there, they still have single-digit penetration across the market. So it's still super early. I don't know, probably 5-10% of households are ready for this kind of stuff. So what we want to do is we want to get really good at that part of the market, so that in 3 or 4 years, when their friends are asking them what to buy, they're saying, hey, check out this one, or you got to look at that product. Look at Leeo. Look at the other stuff, but look at Leeo. You got to look at Leeo. So we want to build fans and a loyal base within that early adopter community. And then we want to launch lots of products that excite the early users. Also build partnerships with like-minded companies. So we'll be talking with everything pretty soon. So just closing thoughts, and then we get to the fun part. Follow your intuition. You can smell the opportunity, and you can quantify it, and you can raise money around all that. And you have to do that in order to get the cash typically. But ultimately, your intuition is going to drive that. And then solve a problem. Identify what it is. It could be that people want to be happy. That's a problem. So identify what the problem is. You don't have to save houses from burning down. You don't have to save people from getting blown up by bombs. Pick something that's really important. The color picking aspect of the product, it produces joy for people. So that's actually solving a problem too. And then this part, be realistic about your natural skills. So figure out how you solve problems and recognize that bias you have around how you solve problems, and build a team that solves problems in different ways. And then help that team get along, because they probably won't get along naturally. And then the last part here is build products that you're proud of, that you're willing to stand on stage and talk about anywhere with any audience. And then cross your fingers for good luck, because you're going to need it. So that's all.
Thank you, Rory and Steven. Any thoughts on retail strategy? So I know you guys have been selling through Amazon and on your website. Any lessons learned there?
Yeah. So with retail, we announced the product and started selling online on our website, and PR drove people there initially. We then went into Amazon and saw, obviously people move toward Amazon because it's just a more comfortable buying place. And then when it comes to in-store rollouts, we're doing that later this year with a couple of partners. We haven't announced yet, so I can't tell you who. I can't announce Comcast, but we have a couple other in-stores. So we've taken a very cautious approach to it, and I think part of that it has to do with the particular product we have, which is that it's meant to prevent your house from burning down. We really want to make sure that it's a very solid, reliable product before we start loading shelves with it, and we also want to understand who's buying it, why they're buying it, what the messaging is around that, so that as we fuel up marketing campaigns, we can do that efficiently. So I would say with retail, take your time and understand who you're targeting, where they're shopping, what's the why to buy, what's the messaging, and just be conservative. Keep your burn down and be really conservative as you go into retail. There's no sense loading up shelves. I've seen friends do this, load up shelves, and then they just have all that money tied up, and it's hard for them to create the sell-through. And then they have a lull, and then you just want to slowly progress with retail. Yeah. Any other questions?
I thought it was really interesting contrast how you talked about kind of starting wide and androgynous compared to the other big you saw, kind of start very focused.
Yeah.
And you were saying find something that excites your users. So I was wondering who you found is excited the most by your first product, and And you were saying now you're like looking to kind of understand more about who you're resonating most with. How much did you do that research before versus how much you did?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So this is the sort of, you need to get comfortable with a certain level of research prior to spending money and risking a lot of things on a product. And so we did focus groups around different feature sets, how to message it, what form factor. If you look at the Nightlight form factor, for example, it's something that's sort of culturally acceptable to hijack an outlet, and we didn't want so one of our firm commitments was no installation required, and so we had to then pick some other form factor that people could just accept as being something that takes that outlet forever. So there were a couple things that we did research on and thought through and decided on, but then we did show it to a lot of different people, and we took their feedback on what they would use it for, and then ultimately we put it in the market to see how the market would respond to it. And what we found is that we were going right down the middle of the line with like let's target families, let's target mom and dad, and the early buyers are 2/3 men. 2/3 older men, actually the generation between Gen Y and the baby boom. So it's like 45 to 55-year-old men are the primary purchasers who are tech geeks. And so that's where it landed, but we started right in the center and then it skewed off right in that direction. So I guess ultimately my advice is to like get comfortable however you need to. Your investors are going to want to know like who are you going to sell to and how's it going to work. They're going to want to know all that before you actually try anything, and so you're never going to get it right unless you're very lucky. But you should at least attempt to do that, and then after you launch it, start measuring and figure out who's buying it and why, who's using it and why. And I think you asked a question about wow, what's the wow factor for someone, or it was like it's most excited. Well, I would say it's that there's an age group of people who are really into tech products, who like new things, and they just love opening the product, setting it up, using it in their day-to-day life. Like they love that aspect of it. So I think that the purchase decisions are coming from people who just want more tech things in their life, and that's the wow. In terms of the use of the product, mostly it's the light changing, like people share the light, the pictures of the light on social media. And then, we've had a couple instances where it saved someone's house, and that one, I mean, everyone in their whole family is going to hear about that one. So they share a lot about it. That's definitely a wow factor, but it's a pretty infrequent thing. So you can't count on that to give enough time, that will actually spread the word. Yeah.
Just curious about.
Thanks again for sharing your experience there. You made a point that the Robotics Revolution is now called the Internet of Things.
Yeah.
Now, I see some overlap there, but can you talk a little bit more about the commonalities and why you make that statement that the two can be equated?
Yeah. So I guess I think it's that there were generations of people that grew up, I think, in the probably in the 50s and 60s reading science fiction books and watching science fiction films and so on, and they sort of like believed that they were going to have flying cars and have Rosie the Robot by 2000, right? So I think that there were like generations of people that believed that there was robotics revolution was coming, and they called it the Robotics Revolution, and it was always 5 years away, and it never quite got here. And then now there's like a new generation of kids, or a few generations that have grown up with the internet and with mobile technology, and so they're much more into like the digital world, and like so their idea of sort of automation and intelligence is much more it's much more sort of abstract. It doesn't take a physical form. So I actually think that our definition of robotics has changed from being something that required a physical robot to sort of intelligence that's software based, that's running across processing and interconnected in our physical world. So that's what I think.
Channel product viability issues, like any hurdles you have to cover to get it into the home or get it into a particular channel for sales?
There are. So obviously, FCC certification, so those kinds of certifications, and then anything that plugs into an outlet, you don't have to have it certified, but you want to get certified by a couple of the top labs, Intertech, UL. So you really ought to do that for the sake of labeling in a certain way in a retail environment. But you can sell online direct without any kind of certifications. Like if you're just getting started, you can launch something and sell it, and there's just liability risk to you, but there's not really like a certification required for that.
I guess curious, what's the appropriate path like for a Nightlight, and how does that inform how you design, build, support a product?
So it's in terms of like sort of like a lifetime. Well, I think that interestingly, if you go to a lot of people's homes who don't have smart nightlights, who have old-fashioned nightlights, you'll find that they're very old. Like the plastic has turned yellow. They've been there for 20 years. So I think, and people, I'll answer your question in two ways. One way is that people's expectations about nightlights are that they're there for a long time, which is really good for Leeo. In terms of the sort of components inside of it, they're going to last 7 to 10 years, or something's going to fail after 7 to 10 years, typically with most electronics. So then there's room to do an upgrade or get something new. But I think in the meantime, a lot of the upgrading is going to come from software. So we actually have a whole sort of roadmap for software updates, and the device is checking each night to update itself. So I hope that answers your question.
So last question from me. You mentioned working with partner companies. Can you give us some examples of what that means?
Yeah. So I think something that it goes back to one of the early points about your team and the size of your team. There are a couple of different types of partnerships, but identifying like-minded partners is actually a really important thing. Just so you have the same vision and the same direction you're headed, and that way you can help each other in a great way. But I'll make 3 points. One is around your team size, and leveraging outside resources when you can makes a lot of sense, especially with a hardware company. So what you want to do is you want to be able to have high volumes with a small team so that it's very profitable and you can make new products because you have to pay for that development cost. So I think that's one reason why. I would say something another reason is distribution. So finding like-minded individuals to distribute your product, because that helps promote your product in certain ways that you would like to be associated with. So with a connected product, it's connecting with platforms that make sense for you and for the aesthetic that you're going for with the use of the product. So in our case, we're working with Comcast. We're part of the Xfinity Home platform. We've taken on strategic investment from E.ON, which is a large utility out of Europe that recently split. The company split into two sides. One side's focused on energy generation. The other side is reinventing itself around consumer solutions, and they've got a lot of great ideas. And then when it comes to crowdfunding campaigns or other ways of marketing or co-branding with other companies, I think that's another area it's really worthwhile because you can promote each other.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. That was great.
Okay, thanks.